Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats.
I've got to say there's something on my mind about the way you've been for a long, long time. You got your mind set up on what you're gonna do, but let me tell you, baby, your mama getting ready to move. You're my little señorita, y tú eres la más bonita. You got it going on. Hey, hey, hey. Mama warned me about a girl like you. She said a girl like that is gonna break your heart in two. With her sexy legs and hair and nasty looking wall. Stop right there, mama. You know that's what I want. You're my little señorita, y tú eres la más bonita. You got it going on. Hey, 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 you're my little señorita, y tú eres la más
Ladies and gentlemen, our program will begin in just a few moments. Please take your seats.
You're my little señorita, y tú eres la más bonita. You got it going on. Hey, 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 you're my little señorita, y tú eres la más bonita. You got it going on. Hey, hey, hold up. You're my little señorita.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 7th Annual Florida Automated Vehicle Summit hosted by Miami-Dade Expressway Authority. Please welcome the Deputy Executive Director of MDX, Juan Toledo.
All right, good morning and welcome back. Today we had a fantastic first day for the FAV Summit. We're very excited about how that went yesterday, and we're looking forward to today's event. It seems like the reception was a hit because a lot of people are still recovering from it. Kind of begs the question, where were you guys yesterday? Because you should be recovering too. So before we start the event today, we wanna congratulate and acknowledge the poster competition submittals. Thank you to all the competition students. This year we had 26 poster submissions from 7 different state universities, and we'll announce the top 3 now. Third place was Chung Fu Zin from the University of South Florida. His poster was titled Highway Life Cycle Cost Analysis for Connected and Autonomous Truck Platooning under Various Lane Management Policies. The second place poster was Flavius Matata from the University of North Florida. His poster is titled Utilizing Connected Vehicles Technology to Enhance Safety on Aging Drivers' Freeway Merging Maneuvers. And I was told that Flavius has no relation to Hakuna Matata, completely different meaning, so in case you see him, please don't ask him to sing the song. And our first place poster was Mahmoud Arafat from our local Florida International University. The poster's titled Perspective Benefits of Connected Vehicles Using Signalized Left Turn Assistant Application, Simulation-Based Study. So these are your top three. Let's all give them a hand of applause. And if you see them out there, so we'll go ahead and begin the show. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please now welcome to the stage your moderator for this session, Michael Granoff, founder and managing partner of Maniv Mobility.
Thanks, Vince. Pat, why don't you come up? I'm going to introduce our panelists in a moment, but I'd first just like to begin by thanking everybody for getting up early and coming out to talk about the future of mobility and electrification and so forth. I also want to just take a point of personal privilege to thank the organizers of this event and to say, I'm living in Israel, but I'm, as you probably can guess, come from the U.S. and spend a lot of time here, and it's dear to my heart. And to see this event is truly inspiring because this is the type of leadership and innovative thinking and coming together in a constructive way that I think we could all use more of. So it's been really inspiring to be here and to be a part of it even more so. So thanks to Senator Brandis and to everybody who organized this terrific forum. So my name is Michael Granoff. I'm the founder of Maniv Mobility. We're a venture capital fund based in Tel Aviv. We have about $150 million under management, a lot of it coming from the automotive sector, from car companies and tier one suppliers, to invest in mobility technology exclusively. And that means sensors for autonomous vehicles and safety and data communications and mobility services and so forth. And we have portfolio companies, a lot of them in Israel, a lot of them in the US and in other places as well. And I, as I'm sure we'll discuss, have been around the electric vehicle industry in different ways for close to 15 years. But I want to begin by observing that we're about to enter the 20s. And if you went back a century to 1920 and you wanted to buy your great-granddaughter a stock for the next 100 years, what would you have picked? If you had been smart, you would have picked a Vince or one of the, I don't know if you were around exactly that long ago, not quite. But you would pick something in that industry because it indisputably, oil production and distribution was the most profitable business for the last 100 years. And 10 years ago, if you looked at the top 10 market cap companies in the world, I think 6 of them were oil companies. Now we look and we see actually that I think 7 or 8 of them are technology companies. So we're in the midst of this transition, and that transition obviously also affects transportation. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about is how that transition happens and what the impact of it is. So now let me finally introduce our panelists. Vince Lichtensteiner is the manager of Fuels and Emerging Technologies for the Marathon Petroleum Corporation. He's a chemical engineer, and he's been at Marathon for his whole career through a whole number of different roles that you can read about in his bio. Pat Romano is president and CEO of ChargePoint, one of the leading providers of electric vehicle charging technology. He's been there in the CEO role for almost 9 years, having spent his career in leading technology companies prior to that. And so I thought, we'd begin, first of all, with a presentation from Vince, who's going to talk to us a little bit about Marathon and about how their business works and how they relate to the transitions that we're beginning to experience. So, thanks.
Hopefully it'll show up on the screen here in a minute. All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody coming today and Senator Brandis inviting me to come and do this. We're going to spend a little time talking about Marathon and then talk a little bit about the overall supply and demand picture, and then move into kind of the liquid fuel supply chain. So my public affairs people said I need to have this, so hopefully you've all read that because I'm going to move on. A little bit about Marathon. We're the nation's largest refinery. We refine 3 million barrels of crude a day. We have 16 refineries, and we make about 17% of the gasoline in the United States. We have a large midstream presence, and really the midstream just connects the crude supply to the refineries and the products to the terminals and ultimately to the retail stations. And in retail, we have about 12,000 locations divided among the Speedway brand, the Marathon brand, and the Arco brand. So I'm going to spend a little time on renewable fuels because they're really a key component of the liquid fuels market in the United States. We participated in a joint venture with Anderson's where we have 4 ethanol plants that we take about 475 million gallons per year of ethanol off of and blend it with our gasoline. We also own and operate a biodiesel refinery in Cincinnati, Ohio that makes about 80 million gallons of biodiesel a year. And we're in the midst of converting our Dickinson, North Dakota refinery into 100% renewable diesel refining. It'll use locally sourced corn and soybean oil to manufacture about 184 million gallons of renewable diesel a year that will be shipped to California because that really helps us comply with the low carbon fuel standard. And that should be done by late next year. A little bit about my group. We're a real small group. I have a group of core engineers with experience across academia, government, and the automotive industry. But we put together a cross-functional team across the whole enterprise where we have retail people, we have economics people, business intelligence, business development type people to really look at what's going on with these emerging technologies. What are they going to How are they going to impact Marathon? How are they going to progress? What's the timing? Because as we all know, we've heard over the last few days, there's a lot of things going on in this space and there's a lot of different timelines. We are an affiliate member of the test track at University of Michigan M-City, and I'm on the advisory board of Drive Ohio, which leads all of Ohio's smart mobility efforts. We're also on the Coordinating Research Council, and we're one of the 2 companies on EPA's Mobile Sources Technical Review Subcommittee. So that's my pitch on Marathon. Now I kind of want to get into the liquid fuel supply chain a little bit with you. And hopefully by the end you'll see that some of the things about this liquid fuel supply chain is that it's highly efficient, multimodal, and complex. We're going to follow it from the start to the end, basically. And Senator Brandes asked me to look about 10 years into the future and what did we see in the liquid fuels and refining market. So I thought it'd be nice to anchor in 2019, but look back 10 years to see really what went on back then. And I'm going to start with the supply picture into Florida. The Energy Information Industry, EIA, put this together for everybody. This isn't a Marathon picture. And you can see that the way product comes into the state of Florida is very flexible. It comes in by barge, it comes in by pipeline, and then it's distributed through the state. And your system here works really well, especially when there's a hurricane or some other natural disaster, to flex, to give more product, to get people out of the state. And we set up a command center in Findlay, Ohio. That's where we're located. To make sure things work well, we make sure there's additional product headed toward Florida before a hurricane or something comes. We make sure that we pride ourselves on our retail stations being the last ones to close if they have to close at all. The same with our terminals, and the first ones that open back up. All the while making sure that our terminals stay safe, the product stays in the tanks, and also making sure our employees are safe as well. This chart comes from our econ group at Marathon, and really what it shows, if you see that black line at the bottom, it shows gasoline demand historically and also a forecast going forward to 2030. And then the blue part and the part with the battery electric vehicles is if we didn't have fuel economy standards holding everything else constant, that's what you would have seen gasoline demand grow to. Anything in the blue really shows that's anything that has an internal combustion engine, whether it's a plug-in hybrid, whether it's a hybrid itself. And the smaller wedge is the impact of battery electric vehicles. So in fact, we are going to see gasoline demand going forward, and it seems like we're going to see a lot more impact of the ongoing fuel efficiency because of the CAFE standards. This is the last slide before we get into the supply chain itself, but this comes from the Fuels Institute, and it's really just a visualization of some of the data around the light-duty fleet in the United States. And what it shows is if For example, in 2018, if we dropped an entirely new technology, we started selling, let's say, all AVs or all electric vehicles or something, the dynamics of the fleet in the United States, it's going to take at least 9 years for half of that fleet to turn over. So going back to looking from 2009 to 2029, if I personalize that a little bit, in 2009 I had a BlackBerry, which was really cool, right? Since then, I've had 5 iPhones, 2 iPads, and 2 Apple Watches. In that same time, back in 2009, my wife got a shiny new Saturn Outlook. We still have that thing. My son drives it. It's going to be around for several more years. So the speed of technology and the vehicle holdover in the United States don't always match up. Okay, let's start with the crude supply, and we're going to work our way through the supply chain. These charts all come from EIA data, and the solid lines are historical, and the dashed lines are their projections. So back in 2009, we had the shale revolution start. Today, 76% of the crude is sourced domestically, with some imports needed to balance out the supply slate. Going forward, by 2029, crude processing is going to plateau because, like we said, gasoline demand is going to reduce, but imports are going to continue to make up less and less of that mix, which is, it's nice for us to be independent in the United States with our energy. Looking at the actual refineries themselves, back in 2009, we had lingering recession effects. Today we have a robust economy, yet we've gone down a little over 10 refineries. And you can see, though, that the red line shows that the capacity of those remaining refineries have gone up because they've become efficient, they're more efficient, they're larger, and they're more flexible. If you give me a moment to step back to 1985, there was 350 refineries back then. So there's been a big rationalization in the refinery market, and that's going to continue through 2029 as fuel demand declines. We're going to see the capacity rationalize as well, and we're going to see more and more energy exports, just like the chart shows there. Biofuels, like I said, are an important part of the mix in the United States here. Back in 2009, it was the beginning of the renewable fuel standard. And so you can see the ethanol capacity was overbuilt, but going forward to today, nearly every gallon of gasoline is blended with 10% ethanol. And right now, there's the ethanol industry and the ethanol world is kind of in a volatile state because we have the renewable fuel standard set and reset going on. 15% ethanol gasoline is something that's out there and being pitched, and there's just general politics. So the whole ethanol market's very volatile is probably the best word I can use. But at the same time, like I said, renewable diesel is really starting to ramp up. We're starting to produce some, and other companies are. And so you can see that kind of boosting and buoying up the entire renewables market. Going forward, we're going to see ethanol continue to trend down along with gasoline. And biodiesel, along with renewable diesel, is going to cause the whole biomass-based diesel space to continue to kind of flatline and be stable. We talked about the midstream that connects the refineries to the service stations. We're using pipelines, trucks, rail, barges. In 2009, we were importing energy. We were bringing in liquefied natural gas. We were bringing in crude. Today, we're pushing everything out. We're pushing liquefied natural gas out. We're pushing out crude and finished products. The shale systems back then had trucks and rail to gather the crude because the pipelines were in place. It was very inefficient. Today, those pipelines are in place. And all gasoline now is just about blended with 10% ethanol. Going forward, we're going to continue to see that energy exports happen out of the United States. We're going to see some challenges in terminals and rail with higher blends of ethanol, terminal and retail because of higher blends of ethanol because some of the incompatibility at the retail level. At the retail level, we were going through the transition to 10% ethanol back in 2009. We just had 465 EV charging stations. Today, like I've said a few times here, fuel efficiency is reducing gasoline demand. This is a 2018 number. I'm sure there's more now. 61,000 EV charging stations. Going forward, we're going to continue to see the retail space rationalize as well because there's going to be less demand for gasoline. And also, how do you fuel some of these autonomous vehicles as well? And we're going to need many more EV charging stations, as you all know. The EEI, Edison Energy Institute, says we need 9.6 million charging stations by 2030, and 900,000 of those are public, with a balance being workplace and home. A little bit on electrification of vehicles. The chart on the right shows that's actual penetration of the fleet, that's not sales, of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. So we have the EIA, the IEA, and also future fuel strategies projections on that. Back in, today we have more models available than we did in 2009. We've seen significant battery cost reductions, and there's some limited interoperability with charging networks, but I know that Pat and others are working on that to make sure they work together well. Going forward, I think we're going to see incremental battery technology improvements. I don't think we're going to see a big breakthrough, because even if we have some significant breakthrough in battery technology in the next 5 years, it's going to take a while for that to commercialize and push out the existing manufacturing base for lithium-ion batteries. So going forward, what is the consumer going to want, and when do we reach some parity between electric vehicles and liquid fuel vehicles? So why does an oil company even care about self-driving cars? Well, a lot of you have seen the Argonne study that says between -60 to +200% impact on vehicle miles traveled. So that's a significant change in the energy demand for transportation. Right now we're seeing autonomous vehicles favor hybrid powertrains because of the competing power demand of the sensor technology and the propulsion technology. And so going forward, what's that going to all come together? That's really what we're interested in learning. That's why we come to these, and to hear what you all are working on. And kudos to everybody that's in a planning role, because going forward, we're going to see a lot more vehicle miles traveled. We're going to see a congestion, especially in urban areas. And I think we're going to see shuttles and some limited ride sharing human drivers are going to be replaced by autonomous vehicle systems. And I think we're going to be able to buy the level 4 autonomy in limited vehicles and in geo-fenced areas. So in summary, we believe we're going to see liquid fuels demand going forward. Refineries are going to continue to be large, flexible, and have to be efficient. We're going to see the fuels and other energy exports increase from the United States. Biofuels continue to be a big part of that mix. And electrified vehicle growth will be moderated by range, infrastructure, and policy. And finally, autonomous vehicles will impact miles traveled. So that's my presentation. I appreciate your time and look forward to your questions.
Now we'll hear from Pat from ChargePoint.
Thanks, everyone. I wanted to try to tie together a lot of the things that we've been talking about over the last few days here, and make some remarks on sort of how the big picture, I think, is going to come together over time. And one of the things I think is easy to miss is that we can't talk about vehicle electrification, autonomous drive, changes in mobility, consumer behavior, et cetera, without talking about them all at the same time. And the reason is they all affect each other. So if we just talk about what it'll take to electrify transportation, we may miss a trend that may make certain modes of transportation irrelevant over time. So we have to kind of commingle the thinking. And just to kind of put a finer point on the time frame, this is going to take a while, but a while goes by faster than you think. And so to use another cell phone analogy, which you heard in the previous presentation, this is a good old iPhone 10. I'm a generation behind. Story of my life. So with the reason that this is the iPhone 10 is it was introduced around the 10th anniversary of the iPhone, which means 10 years ago we did not have the internet in our pocket. It's profound. 10 years ago this didn't exist. We had maybe crude, what we consider crude now, BlackBerry devices, where we could tap out the equivalent of a text or an email, but we didn't have the full-blown internet in our pocket. And why I'm drawing an analogy there is 10 years is not a long time, and this whole transformation of how we move around and how we power that is going to happen probably over about a 30-year cycle. And I'll tell you why I think it's about a 30-year cycle. And let's just look at the electrification of transportation. As the previous presenter pointed out, cars have a life that is a little bit longer than a piece of consumer electronics. So if you look at the 250 million cars and light-duty trucks just on U.S. roads, and you look at about 15 million or so new cars and light-duty trucks being sold every year. If you just divide those two numbers, you get somewhere between 15 and 16 years to turn the fleet over. And that's assuming that today 100% of vehicles sold were electrified. That's clearly not the case right now. So everyone would think, based on that and based on the fact that we don't have enough makes and models now to cover a consumer's demand, assuming that things don't go autonomous, which they will, but let's just assume we just look at the one electrification arc. The interesting thing is that it's going to take just a very long time to turn over that capital. But I think it'll accelerate at the end. And the reason it'll accelerate at the end is consumers are going to get into an increasing squeeze on the residual value of vehicles. Leasing will become very challenging for an internal combustion engine because its residual value will be dropping precipitously, and that will accelerate as we get towards the back end or even the mid of the cycle, because that same fact that vehicles last a long time works against you from a residual value perspective. And so while we're not at 100% electrification of makes and models now, the back end's going to go faster. So if you assume a time frame of 15 to 30 years, this thing is going to be on us inside the time frame that this went from zero to this. I've been at ChargePoint almost 10 years, about be my 9th year anniversary. That went by like that, right? So an industry in change is going to be impactful on all of us. And let's talk about some of the other arcs now that are evolving along with this electrification of transportation. Let's take autonomous drive. That will increment its way to full level 5. And as it does that, as it increments its way there, the world tends to look more like a fleet. Everything fleetifies. It's the fleetification of everything. So if you're ChargePoint and you're worried about today paying the bills with consumer owned and operated vehicles and charging those things as they electrify, what I like to tell our employees is that just remember, in 15 years time frame, and I hope you're all still at ChargePoint in 15 years, because hey, I've been here 9. The interesting thing is that there may be an archaeological dig at some point in the future where they dig up a old office building circa today and find all these copper wires in the ground and these little things that they don't understand. They look like little obelisks, charging stations, and people are like, well, what do they need all this copper and all these charging stations for? Who uses this stuff? No one, right? So they'll go back and look at the history books about car ownership and things like that, and it'll seem like a relic. It'll seem like a relic. So we have to be planning for our own disruption before our own industry is off the ground. Because that's why you see us so feverishly working towards fleet solutions. Because while we have to basically support the electrification of transportation in today's mode, we have to support the electrification of transportation in tomorrow's mode, because it's going to be on us as fast as my iPhone 10 was on me. And that's a pretty profound thing. Secondarily, consumer behavior is shifting. You're seeing a trend towards micromobility. I think autonomy is actually going to do some weird things to real estate because we're going to be less sensitive to time and transport. So there are a whole lot of things that may change about how we get around. And one anecdote is that I get asked all the time, well, how are you going to deal with people that live in dense cities that own a car that have to park on the street? And I'm like, well, look, with workplace charging, they can pretty much invert the charging pyramid and basically, charge at work and a little bit of a around town metro area fast charge. It's still not going to be a gas station model because why would you want to do that? We want to get rid of that chore. But what's interesting is really the answer is those people won't own a car anyway, so they don't matter in the charging equation. Because if you live in a dense city and you work in a dense city and you have the car there because you think you need to go to Costco every 2 weeks in the suburbs, well, Amazon's just going to deliver that stuff to you. At my house, I never go to a big box store. It just shows up on my doorstep. We have to do something about all the packaging, but I'm sure that problem will get solved. But you see, we have to be very careful about what we invest in infrastructurally because all of these things are changing at the same time. So if we look at the big reason that's going to be pushing this through the goal line, if anyone watches football, have you ever seen, a running back at the goal line and his blockers sometimes are behind him, shoving him into the end zone? What's shoving this market into the end zone is that this whole transformation gives us back two things: time and money. And we all have the same 24 hours, so there's no way to buy time. What's interesting about this is the biggest way to affect the cost of living, and as we're dealing with a lot of societal re-engineering regarding incomes and labor and what automation is doing to factories, et cetera, et cetera. What's interesting is renewable energy, autonomous transportation that allows you to buy it by the drink and also have it be very cheap, and basically reducing the cost of transportation's component in the cost structure of everything that we consume. And energy is a big cost structure in everything that we consume. Dropping that drops the cost of everything, and then the effects on real estate due to autonomous drive drop the cost of how we live. And at the end of the day, that makes our life better because we're very inefficiently spending money right now, all of us are, on energy and transportation. The amount of energy that actually goes to your wheels in an internal combustion engine relative to the entire motion of that molecule into your tank and then ultimately its combustion, mostly going to heat, is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. So as we move it to electricity, especially that's generated by renewable energy, that efficiency is going to come back in the form of lower cost, and it's also going to enable us to be less sensitive to time and transport, so we're going to be able to get some time back. So in general, this whole industry that we're all part of, the amazing thing about it is it's actually going to improve the quality of our life. Goods are going to come to us, so we're not going to have that burden of needing to waste time doing mundane chores. We're basically going to be recovering all our transportation time. So now the party starts when you get in the autonomous vehicle with your friends to go to dinner. It doesn't start when you're at the restaurant. It starts when you get in the vehicle because you're not sensitive to that. In fact, one of the things I often say in conferences that are more focused on where vehicles are going is our autonomous vehicles will probably resemble more of an Airstream than a car, because there's no reason for it to look like a car. All these photos that I see of these concept vehicles that look like a car with no steering wheel, I'm like, why does it look like that? That's not what you would design if something was going to drive you around. You'd have the equivalent of a living room or a conference room taking you around because you'd want it to be comfortable. So I think we're going to have a tremendous revolution in just how we get around. And even if you look at other modes of transportation that seem far off but are really pretty practical, like short distance electric aircraft. Remember, they're a lot quieter and you don't have to store volatile fuel. So sticking Jet A on the roof of a skyscraper so you can refuel a vehicle in New York City, which has a whole host of issues, is not there when you go electric. So we are going to see all kinds of modes of transportation evolve. Electric scooters, for example, wouldn't have happened without a lithium-ion battery and really small electric motors. So we're seeing a massive revolution in mobility even outside the normal car domain. Lastly, what I'm about to say might be controversial, and by the way, we've been saying this for 10 years. It is absolutely insane to think that the drivetrain could ever go to anything but a full BEV with some form of battery technology, currently lithium-ion. It'll evolve. Currently lithium-ion, though, and here's why. Hydrogen makes absolutely no sense. Anyone investing in that, please save your time and money. The reason is that why would you take a perfectly good EV, which is what a hydrogen-powered car is? It has a battery, it has an electric drivetrain, but it has a fuel cell and a hydrogen storage tank. Why not just take the hydrogen storage tank and the fuel cell out and put a slightly bigger battery And the analogy there is similar to what happened with solar. Everyone kept saying, well, you know, the cost curves on the polycrystalline are, yeah, right. Enter high volume manufacturing. High volume manufacturing is going to drive the cost structure of a BEV to way lower than the cost structure of an ICE vehicle. And then when you maintenance adjust that, because it has 24 or less moving parts, when you look at the powertrain life of almost 1 million miles, when you look at all those efficiency improvements, it has to go in that direction. And when we pour our energies as a collective community into making something happen, it happens. So it's not about PHEVs. Those are effectively the new compliance car. It is not about hydrogen. It is not about biofuels. It is not about any of that junk. Over the next 30 years, it is 100% battery electric, 100%. The batteries don't, and by the way, what's interesting is the batteries don't need to get any bigger than they really are right now in a vehicle. With decent charging infrastructure, it's completely convenient with a 300-mile range vehicle to cover what you need. It's completely convenient. It's in fact more convenient than owning a gasoline car. I have never been in an industry in my entire life where we have met what I would consider to be the technology requirements of an industry before we've gotten to 1% penetration. This is before we've gotten to 1% penetration. It is amazing where we are right now, and it's only going to get better. And I'm sure the questions will be fun.
Thank you, Pat. When Pat says that a 300-mile electric battery is more convenient than a gas car, I can definitely second that. I'll tell you why. I had the honor in around the year 2007, 2008 to be part of a program with BMW where they gave out 100 kind of slapped together minis that were made all electric. They worked most of the time, not all the time. They had, on a good day, about 80 miles of electric range, but I loved it, and I drove it around. I was living in New Jersey at the time. Drove it around there. Only had a plug at home. There was virtually no public charge infrastructure. And then I would travel, and once I was on a trip and had to rent a car, and it was, I was like third or fourth day in and doing a bunch of driving, and I leave the hotel in the morning, and the gas light comes on, like flashing at me. You're running out of fuel. You have to go get fuel. And I said, how could that be? I just left the hotel. And the reason I thought that is I had just become so accustomed to waking up every morning with a full tank. And even though that tank was only 80 miles a time, that was more than I needed on almost any previous day. So then it became an inconvenience actually to go to the gas station. Although if I'd gone to a marathon gas station, I'm sure that there would have been such amenities that I would have been pleased to have been there. But Vince, talk to us a little bit about how Marathon plans its business in light of some of the things that Pat said, in light of some of CAFE standards that we see, and projections on future volumes. How do you manage that?
Good question. Well, first of all, part of it is admitting that we know that we're going to have a changing demand for our fuel, and as you go forward, you become more and more efficient. Like I said, our refineries have become much more efficient than they were in the past, and the ones that aren't are simply out of business. So as the demand declines, you need to be the most efficient producer, and you also work to, make sure. I mean, does it really? To be honest with you, we have not put chargers in at our stations yet. That's something we look at on a regular basis, but does somebody really want to spend a half hour in a Speedway store? You look at some of that stuff. We're not set up for that kind of a model, so it's not as easy as sticking a charger at a store. So we continue to look at that, and we continue to evaluate how we deal with that going forward.
Pat, you talked about the fleetification of everything, and how does that? Is that something that has changed the way that ChargePoint plans? I know in the early days of ChargePoint, as I can recall, it was a lot about home charging and public level 2. What do fleets mean for your business?
For us, and I think it's just a culture of not of always looking ahead and embracing change and not trying to resist it, because resisting a trend is something that I see legacy industries do all the time, and I think it's just foolish because it delays your investment and survival. We're going to be charging passenger vehicles, electric vehicles that are consumer owned and operated for a very long time. But we're also going to get disrupted by fleet eventually. So if I stay at ChargePoint another decade, I'm going to see that fleet disruption start to affect our business. So the way I like to talk about this with our employees back at home is the vehicle industry is going to go into cyclical unit volume decline. If it's not already upon us, it's happening. It's going to be happening. And the early days of it, it bumps around. You might have a good year and say, yay, we're not in decline, but yeah, we're in decline. So as that consumer vehicle market starts to go into decline, but electrification percentage is rising, we look like we're at a party in a funeral home. Okay, because it's like, woohoo, more units on electric vehicles. Oh no, the unit volume is coming down. The auto industry is over. When those two curves intersect and cars are all electric, it's on the way down for all of us. So what we're doing is investing a huge percentage of R&D into how we deal with fueling fleets efficiently as they electrify. And they're likely to electrify over the next 15 years, not the next 30. And the reason is the purchasing manager at a fleet does not make an emotional decision and does not need the wide variety of fashion types of vehicles that a consumer needs. So we view it as tremendously parallel upside in the short term and massively protecting our downside in the long term. So while we're not taking our eye off the ball on the consumer side at all, I don't mean to say that we're switching business models. We have to survive over the next decade in a significantly growing business as all of us go buy an electric vehicle and need to charge it. So we're going to be investing heavily still in that. But in parallel, there are massive efforts going on fleet. And I think it's hugely exciting. It's hugely, because what this means for the energy industry is you have a concentrated place where you're pumping in a lot of fuel, and that same concentrated place can be a virtual power plant resource. So if we were at an energy conference and not an AV conference, we would be talking about the impact of fleetification on energy.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was spending a lot of time in Washington when the policy was in flux in the years between like 2007 and 2010. And you heard a lot at that time about the theory around peak oil, which was the idea that, the U.S. production had peaked in the early 70s and declined until the shale revolution. And then, there was at that time the theory that, the U.S. peaked, then the world will peak, and then we'll be running out of oil, the price will go up, et cetera. Now you again hear the term peak oil, but it's meant very differently. People are talking about peak demand in oil because of electrification, urbanization, and all the things that Pat spoke about. So, Vince, again, talk about how when you're looking at these trends, does it seem daunting, or does it feel like we still have such an enormous business that this is something that we can manage the future on?
I think the answer is yes to both of those. It's daunting and it's something we can manage. I think it's continuing to be the most efficient operator in a potentially declining market, but there's also EVs are still going to need, we're going to need some type of refined product, whether it's asphalt or plastics or things like that. So it's how do you pivot to those different types of fuels as they're needed. I see, certainly it's something we look at all the time. We look at our plants, we decide what we need, and we scale things up and down. We look at retail, for instance, in the urban areas. You really need to keep an eye on what's going on with the fleet and for the demand for our product. So it's something we keep our eye on, and we definitely want to be ahead of whatever's coming. And that's.
Are you seeing a divergence between, say, your urban locations and your highway locations?
The answer is surprisingly no, because I asked our Speedway group to look at that data, and it came out that they're pretty much still equal demand, and I really did think we would see shrinking demand in the cities, and we're not seeing that yet.
But then again, from where you are, maybe the types of cities that you're in are not yet experiencing the features that we're seeing in some Northeast cities and elsewhere. Maybe that's part of the reason for that.
I think we've looked in Florida, we've looked in New York, the urban and suburban areas. So I feel like we've looked across the United States pretty broadly. Now, I would not say we looked on the West Coast because that's newer to us with our recent acquisition of Endeavor. But I would say where we looked, absent the West Coast, we've not seen it, and that's probably the rest of the states.
You know, what do you think about what Pat said about hydrogen? I have to concede that I myself have occasionally poked fun on hydrogen, like in 2012 when I celebrated the 10th anniversary of George W. Bush's State of the Union, where he said we were a decade away from the hydrogen economy. What's your view on that?
I think hydrogen vehicles have always been 10 years away. You didn't see them on my projection. I think, to Pat's point, we have electric infrastructure, we have liquid fuels infrastructure, we have no infrastructure for hydrogen. There's no way to get it where it needs to go. And when you make hydrogen right now, it's steam methane reforming, so it's a very carbon dioxide intense process. So I can't get where it makes sense unless, if like Pat said, we evolve to batteries that are big and can help heavy duty trucks. Otherwise, that's the only place I could potentially see hydrogen in a depot or a fleet mode where you could come back home and refill with hydrogen. I don't see it.
How many people here aspire to own a hydrogen car?
That's what I thought.
It's hard to see, but I don't see a lot of hands. How about an electric car? And how many people here currently own an electric car? Okay, it's a pretty good number already. And one more thing I'm curious about. How many people here who have like kids of driving age see that their kids are either less interested, less enthusiastic about getting a driver's license than you were when you were at that age? That's definitely the case in my household, and it seems like many others as well. So that would tend to reinforce Pat's theory on fleets being critically important, because those kids are certainly going places. They're just not necessarily choosing to own the vehicle and to be the ones behind the wheel. And so it's pretty fascinating, as I've often said, to see it, an industry and a whole situation that was pretty static for a century, all of a sudden, as Pat's chart indicated, have these changes coming from so very many directions at the same time. It's certainly not boring, Pat.
So one interesting thing on that point, sorry to jump in, we have a real crisis because industries that have been around for 100 years that get very narrow, and by the way, one of the things I like to criticize all the time is if you look at most very large established companies, how many businesses are they in? They tend to be in one. That's a real problem. If you look at Amazon, it's 25 years old. How many businesses is it in? A lot. It has to do with the leadership. The problem is if you put an optimizer at the top of a company, it's vulnerable from an innovation perspective because it'll always be short-term focused. So what we have is we have 100, sometimes more than 100 years in oil and gas. It's more than 100 years of tradition. And those businesses are so well run because you've got so much money flowing through them all the time that optimizing by a penny just generates so much top line, or so much bottom line, I should say. So the interesting thing is now, what I'm also fond of saying is that Elon Musk has way more in common with Henry Ford than Bill Ford Jr. Nothing against Bill Ford Jr., it's just he's, kind of part of a company that's at the back end, not the front end, right?
Still true after the Mustang?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the Mustang, I think the Mach-E, by the way, is a great car.
Right.
I think Ford could have done that in their sleep
Right.
a long time ago.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm glad they've done it, and I'm not saying anything negative about it. I think it's a wonderful car, and I'm so glad they did it. And they made a statement with a vehicle and put their most prized brand on that car. But what's interesting is we've got to be, we're criticizing companies like Tesla for taking risks and not being immediately profitable. Who are you kidding? You're not going to be immediately profitable starting a car company. You shouldn't ask for them to be immediately profitable. That's nuts. Look at what they're doing. Right? Look at what they're doing. Breaking all the trends. No, what? Dealerships? Who cares? Right? Model years? That's gone. Right? Who needs that? Why do we constrain cars on? Why can't the car evolve? So why can't it software update like my iPhone? So look at all that innovation, right, and all that change. That's heavily, heavily disturbing the status quo that the optimizers enjoy. So the problem that we have with the speed of this is we've got the wrong DNA in charge of the infrastructure. We need to flip all the DNA, right? Flip it all basically into innovation mode to get it to go faster.
Interesting. I think maybe we'll have time for one or two audience questions. While you're bringing the mic around, I just want to really quickly get both your views on policy as it relates, let's just say, to EV. And we could talk about Europe or China, but with the limited time, let's talk about U.S. $7,500 tax credit. Should that still be there? Should there be different policies?
Check.
Pat, what do you think?
I'm a proponent of any credits or policies can be there to get businesses off the ground, but they have to properly sunset in a smooth way. So what we should do is level the playing field. First of all, we should pull all the oil and gas subsidies out. Just pull them all. It's not needed. This industry is 135 years old. We don't need oil and gas subsidies. Sorry. But we don't. And what we also need from a vehicle incentive side is we just need some thoughtful vehicle incentives that sunset relatively quickly as the auto industry just gets goes up the volume curve on something that will ultimately be a lot cheaper for consumer
current
later.
construction correct, like per brand? Or?
No, I mean the per brand is so crazy. Let's penalize the first mover that's successful. So let's take Tesla to put everything into electric vehicles and say, well, okay, you ran your credits out. Oh, that's real smart. Or let's sunset a tax credit over a 1 or 2 year period. Why would we do that, right? You got to sunset things smoothly, right? Because nothing in nature changes abruptly. So you've got to sunset stuff smoothly. But what we can't do is we can't create price support for business models that otherwise wouldn't survive. Because that doesn't do any, that just creates a continuous dependency on price support. So I think what you do is you pump very thoughtful, very careful, very sunsetting over a smooth period incentives into a market, leave it in the hands of the free market, and let people compete for it.
Vince, any thoughts on it?
I tend to agree. We need to allow free market to work. I think thoughtful and gradual and all that doesn't work in this government we have right now. I think we need to continue to hope for things in Washington to focus on the kind of transportation. I think there's a lot of distractions. Specifically to our world, the EV credit is interesting. It seems like it's picking a technology, but we have to live with it and compete against it at this point.
All right, do we have an audience question? Yeah, go ahead.
Hey there.
I recognize you.
I'd like to ask a question, maybe of Pat. Tesla's gone vertically integrated with the battery. They've also done it with the charging network. And, obviously you're in that business. So do you feel that most automakers, even if they integrate the packs, do you think that is it wise for them to integrate the charging network? And what's the counter argument to that?
Well, okay, so let's talk about, it's really two very different topics. Let's talk about vertical integration. So there is no industry historically where you have a bill of materials concentration of a single thing that hasn't gone eventually to the maker of that single thing. So TV sets, in the glass-blown tube days, who remembers those, right? Big console thingies. RCA, Thomson, Sony, they mastered blowing glass tubes, right? Big, huge glass tubes. And so they dominated because that was the cost structure dominant of that TV set. The minute it went flat screen, all the consumers were like, meh, I really don't care if it's an RCA anymore. They did for like a little while. But the brand affinity went away like that. And suddenly it's LG, Samsung, Sony's coming back because of OLED. Moral of the story, if you ain't making batteries, you ain't making cars in the long term. Because the battery's dominating it. There's nothing, an electric motor is about that big. A 400 horsepower electric motor, and there are two of them in a car. You got 800 horsepower in two little things about that big. Not much bigger than a basketball. And the water has been wrung out of that rock. Yeah, there's some advancements in magnets and some other stuff that's going to go in there. So that concentration is real, and automakers need to get real about what the real value is in a battery electric vehicle. In terms of charging network, Tesla put in a long-haul charging network. Most Tesla fuel comes in at home and work. Most electric vehicle fuel comes in at home and work. For us, as a company, I really applaud what Tesla did because they had to do a thoughtful highway network because home and work sort of takes care of itself. Businesses invest in it. Homeowners have control of their own garage. Apartments and condominiums are now embracing that as a competitive thing. Building codes are changing to require it in apartments and condominiums in cities. So they dealt with the last problem. We don't own chargers. Most people think we do. We don't sell power. We provide chargers to businesses that don't want to have to deal with the infrastructure associated with dispensing liquid fuel on a service basis. So we get a service subscription for a charger being on our network. Convenience stores, gas stations to some degree that are in the right positions, et cetera, will be on our stuff, on our platform. But that long-haul driving, that Tesla network, it's 10% of the fuel and a fraction of the transactions per year. So while they have a charging network, it's not the charging network. In Sesame Street terms, it's a sometimes food. You know, the Cookie Monster now, you know, it's bad for kids, so he now says it's a sometimes food. Right?
I think we have one more audience question.
Yes, Pat. I have a question for Pass. Vince's charts with regards to future use don't align with your comments. The conventional vehicle, while some demand is going to be gone, seems to be taking up really the vast majority of space, unless something dramatic changes to make those charts wrong. And I don't understand your comment with regards to we should have an expectation that an electric car company should be able to make money. I think that's got to be a given. You can't stay in the business, and the payouts are strong, and it seems to me in data that I'm observing that other than Tesla, a lot of electric cars are not selling, and the cost of conventional vehicles is going up, while still electric vehicles for the most part are very high.
Yeah, so every business should make money at some point. Okay, at some point. So if you look at why venture capital why Silicon Valley exists, here's the story of ChargePoint to just give you an analogy. We've raised $540 million in paid-in capital over 12 years, most of it back-end loaded. Imagine if I went to the CFO actually, of an oil and gas company and I said, hey, give me a decade and $540 million and let me see what I can make of it. That's why they don't do anything. They're run by optimize. You have to invest, so Tesla will be plenty profitable. Plenty profitable. The question is, how long does it take an industry to retool itself? So if investors are willing to support it in the short term while it's money losing, and it's really kind of not now, it's kind of teetering, it'll go profitable, not profitable, profitable, not profitable for a little while because it's skating around that transition point, so it's buffeting a little bit. But once it punches through, it'll punch through. And then it's on the leading edge of the trend because it didn't hesitate. So that's what should happen. And in terms of trends with respect to his charts versus mine, I won't mention the oil and gas company that was in just talking to us for a whole day workshop, but they put similar charts up. And I looked at the chart and I'm like, oh, that's your problem. You don't think this is happening. That's your problem. And here's what I got. Oh, we're a conservative company. I said, yeah, if you're a conservative company, a conservative behavior would be to assume it was going to happen sooner, not later. Because that would drive your behavior in the conservative direction, which is to assume that you're going to sunset over a 30-year period. And remember, an industry on its way down consolidating, there's plenty of money to be made, but an industry on its way down is not fun. It's not fun for anyone in it. Ask people in coal right now. Still burn plenty of coal. It went over the top a while ago, stock price-wise. But we still consume coal. So imagine the oil and gas industry when we go over the top. It will be a zombie for a long time, meaning it's dead, it just is still walking around, right? And it doesn't get double tapped for 30 years. But man, walking around as a zombie for 30 years? Not fun.
Although potentially still value there.
Yeah, there's still value. I mean, the finance guys will make money on it. I don't want to be part of it.
Anything you want to respond?
I don't I don't feel like a zombie right now, but we'll see. I think it's a valid point. I think it's, that's why they created my position and why we're looking at this stuff. But it's a very large machine, and we have to continue to look at those things.
I think we're about out of time, but I hope that getting up early was worthwhile for all of you. I hope you've learned something here, and certainly we'll come back in the 2050 edition of FAV, and we'll all see how it played out. So thank you. Have a good.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Grayson Bruelty of Bruelty & Company.
Together, more or less in line, just keep trucking on.
Arrows of neon and flashing marquees out on Main Street. Chicago, New York, Detroit, and it's all on the same street. Your typical city involved in a typical daydream. Hang it up and see what tomorrow brings.
Yeah.
Awesome. Really enjoyed the last panel, and oil and gas is going to be here for a long time, and they're going to become diversified energy companies at the end of the day. So we're here to talk about the future of trucking, and thanks, Sue, for having the Dead play Truckin'. And just like the Grateful Dead have reinvented themselves with John Mayer and Dead & Company, we're going to have a conversation about how the trucking industry is reinventing themselves with autonomous trucking. So I'm going to ask all of my wonderful panelists to give you a quick introduction about themselves. Stefan?
Hey guys, I'm Stefan Seltz-Oxmacher. I'm a CEO and co-founder at Starsky Robotics. We're making self-driving trucks a reality by making them teleoperated for the first and last mile, autonomous on the highway, and then by actually operating the fleet so that we can pick our battles and pick the easiest ones. To that end, you might have heard of us earlier this summer, you might have been reminded of us earlier this summer, when we completed the world's first, and to my knowledge, only ever fully unmanned public highway run, and that was up in Orlando on the Florida Turnpike, where we went about 10 miles in public traffic with no person at all in the vehicle.
Robert?
Thanks, Grayson. My name is Robert Brown. I'm the head of government and public affairs at Too Simple. We are also a level 4 heavy-duty truck technology developer. We're headquartered in San Diego, California. All the fun stuff's out in Tucson, Arizona. Kind of our news this year was we did a pilot with the Postal Service running from Phoenix to Dallas each way for a couple weeks. And then UPS invested in us a few months back, and we do daily operations for them. Similar to Stefan, we do level 4. Kind of a distinction is we do what we call distribution center to distribution center, so local and highway roads, full automation, level 4 on repeatable routes for the freight industry. Looking forward to it.
Hi, good morning. My name is Chris Nord. I'm with Ryder System. I'm the Senior Director of Advanced Vehicle Technology and Energy Products, which basically means that I have responsibility to analyze and look at companies like Starsky and Too Simple and many others as well, in order to really see what products and services and business models are going to come into the future, how we offer those products and services to our customers in the safest possible way.
And I'm Kelsey Burnett-Fiedler. I work for Munich Re, which is one of the largest insurance companies in the world. I work in the mobility domain of their incubator, which is their U.S. innovation operations. And Munich Re currently writes insurance for autonomous vehicles.
Robert, you said all the fun stuff's happening in Arizona. Stefan, we know what you did here in Florida was amazing. Why is it happening in Arizona and not California and those other states?
As a former Governor Brown employee, I love California. I was born in California. But we, unfortunately, the level 4 trucking industry, we've been stuck in regulatory purgatory since 2012. We've passed the law in California, but California DMV is still working on regulations for heavy-duty trucks. And I know we keep hearing that it will be soon, but 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, Too Simple made the decision to, we still have our headquarters in San Diego, but move our testing and development center to the Tucson. Governor Ducey and Arizona Department of Transportation and the mayor of Tucson invited us up with open arms. And so we made the move, and now we're up over, I think, about 120, 25 employees. They did an economic impact study, over $1 billion of indirect investment. So that's the kind of stuff, unfortunately, California has missed out on. And I know they're a company left, and a lot of our companies in our space still do obviously still have presence in Silicon Valley and California, but a lot of us have moved out of the state, which is good for the other states, bad for California, but it's the reality of doing business in California.
So what's bad for California is good for Florida, so you know where this is going. How do we get the trucking companies to relocate to Florida?
So I think there's a lot that Florida's already doing to get there. First of all, there's the great regulatory environment that's been set up and really championed by Senator Brandis, who's with us today. And then there's the broader ecosystem of support. So I know there's a lot of great things happening up in Orlando with Luminar. I know there's a burgeoning tech sector here in South Florida and in every part of Florida. And that's why we've had a handful of people in Florida for the last couple of years, including remote driving stations in multiple parts of the states.
And Chris, Ryder's based here in Miami, and seemingly everywhere you look, you see the coupe trucks. And what kind of support have you seen being based here in Miami?
Miami is a great city with plenty of diversity. And especially at times when there's rapid change in an industry, it's great to have many different viewpoints from many different parts of the world. So Miami and the surrounding areas, and we're located sort of in between Miami and Fort Lauderdale, so we're able to kind of pull talent from both of those cities, and it's been really beneficial for us.
That's awesome. We're going to dive in here and talk about what is the future of trucking. But before we get there, Kelsey, from your perspective of being an incredible analyst in the insurance space, what is the future of trucking from an analyst perspective in insurance?
So a common misconception is that insurance for autonomous vehicles is something that's dramatically different than insurance for, let's say, the regular trucking industry. And although it's slightly different, there's other things that we need to take into account. Insurance definitely wants to be there to enable commercial operations and help people where risk is concerned. And that's where we're going to be for the autonomous trucking industry, is there to help them analyze their risks, provide insurance, and kind of be there for them to enable their industry.
And you're doing great things and enabling it. Robert, you want to talk about what Too Simple's vision is? You are doing incredible things.
For
trucking.
For trucking, yes. So there's a lot of kind of rhetoric around there around driver shortage and it's an aging population. And some of that's true, some of it's not. There's definitely driver shortages in certain segments of the trucking industry. It's not definitely in all segments of the trucking industry. But the segment that I think both of us are trying to tackle is that long haul route. Like we did with the Postal Service, Phoenix to Dallas. It's done by team driving today. The Postal Service contracts most of the work out, but even there, they said they have over 12,000 long haul drivers vacancies right now. For those routes. They can recruit drivers for local driving, local pickup and delivery, but to find a scalable solution where a truck doesn't have to stop for hours of service and you could take a a 5-day cross-country trip and make it 2 days. You start competing against air freight and getting stuff off the airlines. And like the Postal Service, they said they don't have it, planes like UPS and Amazon and such. And so that's something that they're interested in. So it is too simple. We're focused on developing a product. Unlike Stefan, we haven't pulled the driver out quite yet, but we're shooting for 2021 for a pilot driver out operations, most likely in the 3 states we're operating today. And then a commercial product by 2023, 2024, horizontally integrated with our OEM partners.
So, Stefan, you've taken a different approach than the rest of the industry. Do you care to share that approach?
Yeah, so I like to paraphrase Winston Churchill when thinking about the trucking industry and how it fits into the broader economy. And that is that trucking is the absolute worst way to move goods, except for all the others. And to that end, the issue is the cause for the driver shortage is a fundamental cap on productivity. Essentially, you can only sell the space in a truck per mile at a certain rate because it's fairly commoditized. Drivers can only physically drive one truck at a time. They can only physically drive for so many hours a day, even before starting to think about hours of service. And fundamentally, the amount of money that leaves you to afford to pay drivers just isn't enough to get people to spend a month at a time in a truck. This isn't a problem in a country that's, say, the size of Maine or the size of Rhode Island, but it's a massive problem in the second, third largest country in the world, depending on how you count it. So the fundamental way that I view the future of the trucking industry is solving that productivity cap. And that means that we essentially can make what is right now a terrible form of transportation of goods into an incredibly efficient form of transportation of goods. And to think about what that means a decrease in the cost of how everything that you buy moves and the component cost of everything that you buy moves, which probably can decrease the cost of living by somewhere in the range of 3 to 6%, which is the type of thing that empowers GDP growth for a decade. The way that we think that happens is quickly integrating into the market as it exists today. So rather than selling trucking companies robots that they don't necessarily really know how to buy today, selling them capacity through their brokerages, which is something they buy every single day from a large number of small carriers. And that's part of why we've not only been able to already take the person out of the truck, we've been able to haul quite a bit of freight commercially even since first half of 2017. And been able to build a pretty meaningful business of hauling freight on a regular basis.
And Chris, what's your perspective on the future of trucking?
So I know that we're talking about taking the driver out of the truck, but I think that there's an intermediary step that's really interesting, which is that these systems are basically safety support systems. And there's still going to be, for quite some time, until the transportation networks get redefined, new business models gets created, you're going to have a need for the driver both in the first mile of the route and the last mile of the route, or specifically even at the destination and origin point. And so the autonomous systems that are then going to be taking over, like the autopilot for airplanes today, means that you're now going to have a very comfortable, easy job in comparison to the very rigorous scenario that exists today, which is that you have to look at and pay attention for 8 hours straight, basically. And that creates a lot of accidents and risks. And so the elimination of those risks, as well as the improvement of the condition of the work environment, means that all of a sudden you're probably going to be able to recruit drivers much more easily than you were doing in the past. And the pressures that we're seeing in the industry today around driver shortage is incredibly significant, to the point where companies are spending massive amounts of money on just training new drivers that they retain for only months, not years. And this has the potential to change all that. So even in the short term, I'm really encouraged by the products that are being created and the solutions that are being created.
And I know that we talk a lot about driver shortage being something that faces the trucking industry, but insurance placement is also very difficult for the industry. We've seen a shift in the last 10 years where it could be because of driver experience, it could be because of the advent of smartphones, certain distractions, but the losses that insurance companies face in this industry have become greater and greater, and that's caused them to not write insurance in this area anymore. It's considered to be a very risky business to get into. And so the improvements that we can make not only improve maybe drivers' quality of life in their work, but also enable small business owners to actually place that insurance if we know that it's going to be less risky.
And following up on Chris's theme and your theme around risk, Munich Re at AVUSI in Orlando announced A-Verified. Can you tell the audience what A-Verified is and what the plans are?
Yeah, absolutely. So even though we've been writing insurance for the autonomous vehicle industry for many years, we started to see that there was an opportunity for us to facilitate the industry in other ways. And so A-Verified is a pilot by Munich Re to enter the area of third-party verification of autonomous vehicle manufacturer operations. And so although there are many bodies that are much more capable than us to create standards and best practices of consensus among the industry, we're starting to look at ourselves as a third-party verifier that can go in and say, yes, these companies are doing what they say they're doing, and therefore add a little bit more substance behind the claims that they are making through their very forward-thinking publications such as their VSSAs or safety reports. And so this is something that we see as an area where we can really enable the industry to go into the next steps of deployment.
Robert, Stefan, Chris, any thoughts on that approach?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely wonderful. You know, it is, especially obviously with what has happened. You know, we're in Tucson, but Tempe is a quick drive up I-10. And when Elaine Hertzberger was killed, it was a very stark moment in Arizona, and then obviously as the whole industry. And you know, as a company, as an industry, we've been trying to be as transparent as possible, whether it's having media come in for ride-alongs, having obviously law enforcement and our ADOT partners and our other DOT partners come in and meet with our teams, go on rides, understand what we're doing. But to have that third-party credibility, I think, is going to be a game changer for the industry. So to try to get out of our silos and make sure that all of us are testing and deploying in a proper way, because we understand, our friends and families ride on the roads out in Tucson as well, alongside our trucks, since we want to be safe, but also we want to be safe because we understand a too simple accident affects the whole industry. So it's a rising tide raises all boats kind of scenario with this, and so I applaud Munich Re what they're doing, and we're excited about the future with them.
I think at a broader level, safety is the hardest thing about this entire problem. There's been really exciting demos about autonomous vehicles for 15 odd years. And the difference between those exciting demos and us all living in an autonomous dream is the capability to make those systems safe enough to actually be deployed. And what's problematic about safety is there's not just the safety of the autonomous vehicle, like what does it do when the kid's chasing the bouncing red ball across the street. There's also the safety of making sure that the vehicle will do the right thing when the kid's chasing the bouncing red ball. The hundreds and thousands of tests that you have to do to figure out, is this thing safe enough to deploy? Are those tests themselves reasonably safe? Which is broadly what I think has been largely holding up a lot of the industry is trying to figure out this problem and honestly even get consensus around what safety for this space means.
Yeah, I think that, looking at safety and transparency, I think one of the things that a lot of individuals from outside of trucking don't understand about us is we're all friends and we get along. And there's a lot of collaboration that goes on in the trucking industry that never really talked about. And I think that level of collaboration around safety, we're not competing on safety. We're all, like Robert said, all boats lift up. We're all working together to make something happen. Together, and you build good relationships. And Robert, one of the most interesting things about you and your background, you worked in corrections. So don't worry, he's not going to arrest anybody. But how did you go from corrections to autonomy? It's fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely had an interesting path to get here on this stage today. So yeah, I was working at a maximum security prison in San Diego for 5 years, doing kind of a different version, I would call it public affairs. My job is to bring in rehabilitative programs for the inmate population and kind of be the face of the prison when the warden isn't available and work with our inmate population on rehabilitation. I love what I did. I did some great programs. But I always say for every one service dog program and yoga program I got started, I had 9 just the worst things to deal with as a human can deal with. So it wore on me, and I remember telling my wife that I needed a change, and LinkedIn was awesome, and this company called Too Simple was hiring, and I was like, well, I like trucks. My dad, that would be fun, and Shouty, our founder, after my 5th interview, I finally he asked me why are you here? I was like, well, if I can sell felons to California, I think I can sell self-driving trucks to the American public. So he bought it, and so far so good. These last 2 years have been pretty amazing. It's been a lot of growth. I was the 40th employee hired, and we're nearing over 270 in the U.S. So it's been crazy to see the growth, both exciting and scary at the same time. But it's been a lot of fun.
What's exciting and scary is definitely in 2017, you have this very infamous quote where you stated, "When this plays out, I'm either going to be on the level of Rockefeller or in jail." You gotta talk about it.
Yeah. So I was a nice 2 years younger then, so that's completely different.
Because he knows how to put you in prison.
Crap. So what's the age that we're at right now is incredibly resembling of the Gilded Age of the late 1890s, early 1900s. And that's that there's this series of AI technologies that have the capacity to fundamentally change the market in ways that frankly make smartphones seem kind of stupid. I had an interesting realization the other day where the freight market in Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida, all states where it's currently legal to deploy unmanned trucks, the freight market in those 4 states is roughly equivalent in total revenue to the global streaming market. So all Netflix, all Hulu, Disney Plus, things we don't have in the US, all of that together is roughly the equivalent of trucking in 4 American states. And if you make autonomous trucks work in 48 states, in 49 states, then holy crap, you have companies that are actually making hundreds of billions of dollars a year in revenue and nearly as much in profit. And that's a fundamentally interesting thing, and that leads to the Rockefeller outcome, which is, to be clear, my preference.
I would hope so.
Now, much to the same point about safety, there's a lot of ways you can mess it up. You could be actually trying to do bad things. You can get pressure from well-meaning people who don't understand what they're pressuring you to do that causes you to not do good things. There's the lack of safety that can happen from not being aware of what you might be doing, which is itself an interesting risk. And I think rightly so, any of those reasons and a whole bunch of others can lead to criminal prosecution of the people who mess things up and cause an incident. So there aren't many jobs where either you can be as rich as a small country, or you can end up spending time in Robert's old workplace.
Yeah.
I know a guy that can help you out if
And Kelsey, you hear comments like this. It's risky. What do you do as an insurance company?
Well, one thing I would like to clarify is that criminal representation is not covered under the insurance policy. However, when we're an insurance company and we're looking at these types of risks, we take a lot of information into account and a lot of data. And autonomous trucking, although relatively little data is available on it, it is not the most complicated thing that Munich Re insures. We insure nuclear facilities, we insure submarines, we insure skyscrapers, cruise ships. There's a lot of things that we insure that we don't have the data on. These are things that hopefully do not get into liability and risk situations or fatalities very often. And so while we always look to the future of the industry, we go in and we want to see kind of what the industry is doing to make sure that it's safe. And I think that a lot of these companies are doing the right things, but as you said, it's really the risk of the things that they don't know that they're doing. And that's why we're there to be a partner with them in risk management and help them manage the next 10, 20, 30 years of this industry and the risk that's involved with that.
That's awesome. And Chris, Ryder's publicly traded, and obviously it's a lot different than being a private company. How do you manage risk as you're looking at all these new innovative technologies?
So Ryder's a 85-year-old company, and it's pretty conservative. We do look at safety protocols, we look at data, but there's not a lot of data out there yet. And so what we want to make sure that we're doing is learning as much as possible with as little risk as possible. And so as an example, we're leasing trucks to Starsky, as an example, and we're maintaining those vehicles, and we're learning about the systems that are sitting on there in order to, turn the steering wheel by itself and actuate the accelerator and the brake. And we're going to continue to manage those systems because it's part of the vehicle, just like anything else on the vehicle. And through that learning, we're going to start understanding not just what systems, but what manufacturers and what software providers are creating systems with the highest level of safety. And we do also have an insurance product, so this is really encouraging actually to hear about the ways that you are looking at the industry and creating standards, or looking at whose standards to follow and adopt. So really we're in this massive learning mode together with everybody else in the industry. And the hope is obviously that we're going to take that data and those learnings in order to adjust to these new conditions and these new products, because our industry is going to look extremely different 5 to 10 years from now, and there are going to be companies that get disintermediated because of companies like yourselves that start to actually run loads and just plug right into all of the systems that already exist, where companies like myself actually utilize you guys to haul freight.
And I want to piggyback on that with you. So Ryder being over 80 years old, the last 40 years you've had uninterrupted quarterly payouts with a current dividend of 4.2%. Your current market cap's $2.7 billion and your PE is in the low 20s. How does Ryder balance the right amount of investment in new technologies with being a conservative company while still maintaining the dividend?
Right, and so we've been on the forefront of a number of different technologies somewhat recently, natural gas being one of those. And unfortunately, I have scars both on my chin and on my back from a lot of the experiences that we've received from being on the very forefront. And so it's important to be somewhere near the forefront, but not on the bleeding edge for a company like ourselves. We don't have Silicon Valley type investors that are funding us. And so because of that, we again are in the learning mode as opposed to pushing the brink of these various barriers that exist right now based on common conceptions. That is the job of these gentlemen, and our job is to kind of see who's going to come out on top and make sure that we're integrating and supporting those companies. And there's going to be more than one. There's going to be many different models. I mean, the two gentlemen sitting here have two completely different models of executing their autonomous solutions. And there's going to be niche places for each one of those, and niche is probably not even the right word because the applications are so incredibly broad. And the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is incredibly large.
You said a great thing that got me thinking, and it's been our two companies are actually like grandfathers compared to our space. Our space has exploded from in a good way. Number of entrants. I think there was 4 of us, and then we lost one with Uber, and it was Embark, Starsky, and ourselves for a little while, and then there's been OEMs and a bunch of new startups that have gotten into the space. But one thing nice about our partners in the trucking industry is that they are conservative. So it is a nice, and not to put everyone else on blast or anything like that, but they've kept us at least a little in check. The exuberance of Silicon Valley, or in our case, San Diego. In our case, the Postal Service, UPS, they're not going to let us go out there and just start, making, crazy claims and whatnot. So it's been a nice yin and yang approach with our tier 1s and OEs, and just the ecosystem of the trucking industry is inherently a conservative industry. And with a disruptive technology that we're providing, it has been a great learning curve, so it's been, working with, giants of the industry that are 100-year companies it's been really fun. It's been something that I've really enjoyed.
On the conservatism of the broader industry, I think there's an interesting thing here. So trucking is inherently a really high volume business. If you're running a trucking fleet, you're dealing with hundreds of issues a day, and if you mess up any of those issues, someone shows up and yells at you. And you can expect to be yelled at and often cursed at and called really not nice things by at least several people a day. And whether that's internal people or drivers who feel like you've stiffed them because they have 3 hours until they get their next load assignment, anywhere in the middle, there's a lot of yelling. And inherently what that creates is a situation where if you can easily solve 95 of those problems with processes that already exist, then the 5 that are going to get you yelled at that don't fit within those processes, that's a lot easier to deal with. And fundamentally, that makes it very hard to want to adopt new technology that might replace your processes for solving those first 95 problems. That's part of why, broadly speaking, it's been really hard for Silicon Valley companies in particular to sell technology to the trucking space. There's a number of people who have tried, there's a number of people who have been successful, but relative to the size of the overall market, it's actually seen a lot less technology coming out of Silicon Valley than other comparable spaces. And this is why I think autonomous trucks are so interesting, because even in a space where many of the ERPs these companies are using resemble, awful looking SAP Oracle systems from 25 years ago, even in a space where that is what they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis, yeah, sure, if you can haul my freight, please. No one in the truck, go ahead, I don't care. We have both a fleet of regular trucks and a fleet of autonomous trucks. We've done the one public road unmanned test, but you would not believe how many of these professionally conservative companies that we work with who, when we catch up with them, they're like, yeah, so really, how many of these trucks even have people in them? Like, no, we tell you, that'd be up front. Yeah, don't tell me, but like, seriously, how often? How many of these trucks are hauling my freight with no person in them? And that speaks to the level of the issue that the market has with this shortage. It is the fundamental defining issue in U.S. logistics, which is why it's so exciting to be part of the group of people who gets represented on this panel to tackle it and bring about the future of freight.
And we talked a lot about the conservativeness of the industry. I think it's wonderful because, Robert, you're doing stuff with UPS and United States Postal Service. They keep you in check. There's no Adam Newman and there's no WeWork running around trucking because there's partners to keep everybody grounded, and there actually is a path to profitability. Robert, what is the path to profitability for Too Simple? Is it through partnerships?
Yeah, like Stefan, we are making money, but we have 2 people in the cab on every mission we go on, so we are definitely not profitable. So we are one of those, even though we're not in the valley, but we are one of those Silicon Valley companies that is funded by other people's money. Obviously the path of profitability, even, in 2021 when we pilot the driver out, that's a retrofit solution where we all, see the pot at the end of the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is product level commercial development where UPS and the Postal Service can order a Peterbilt or Navistar with the autonomous package, and that's when it scales to provide safe, reliable, self-driving trucks, to market. And I always tell people it'll be regional, route specific, and incremental. You're not gonna snap your fingers and all 48, the lower 48 will have, self-driving trucks. There's no coincidence that pretty much everyone is either testing in the Southwest or the Southeast along I-10. There's a few states we need to bag into the green zone, but other than that, and like Stefan says, I was just in Texas at Texas Mobility Summit was this week as well, and they did had a slide up there, and there was like 22,000 trucks drive on I-35 every day, and I was just like, I texted our CFO, I was like, we could just do I-35, I mean, so the scalability and to make money, you only would have to map, a few, and we all know where the major freight corridors are. It's not just like, ooh, a surprise, So you literally can just map, even if you did I-10, that's $6 billion worth of freight just on I-10, from Florida to California. So, obviously there's a lot of steps to get there before we have that Peterbilt and Navistar with the autonomous package, but we're in the processes of doing it, and we are pretty confident we can deliver on those timelines.
Awesome. And let's pivot into energy. Chris, is there ever going to come a time when long-haul trucking is primarily electric and not diesel?
Yes.
When?
Yeah, the when is always the great question, right? What I see is a tremendous amount of energy being spent right now by both traditional as well as non-traditional OEMs on creating the drive systems, the battery packs, and progress is really happening incredibly quickly. So in just a couple of years, you're going to have a number of OEMs that offer all electric tractors, straight trucks, vans, everything under the sun. And what we will probably discover pretty quickly is that the vehicle is not the problem. The energy and the charging infrastructure is really what needs to be solved in order for that to scale. But that's okay because there's going to need to be a number of years where improvements in the vehicles is created so that you don't have immediately a shotgun of hundreds of thousands of electric tractors on the road additional per year. It's going to start in the few thousands. And it's going to start in regional applications, return to base operations, and then it's going to expand from there. We learned an incredible amount from the expansion of natural gas into the trucking industry with the need to build new fueling stations. And even though it's slightly different because you have a much better ability to create a distributed model with one EV in every household, so to speak, or in every shop, as opposed to with the natural gas where it was basically you needed 20, 30, 40, 50 in a single location in order to build a fuel station to support it. So the first EV that everybody adopts is going to be the easiest, in my opinion, in many ways. And then it's going to get more and more difficult as you start scaling because of the amount of energy that you're going to need at a single site, because of the software systems that you're going to need in order to manage that fleet of EVs, because the information that you need all of a sudden is very different. You need to know that every vehicle is connected to a charging station, and whether it's on or waiting to, for the cheapest time of day to charge, and what the state of charge of every vehicle is. Today, nobody worries about how much diesel fuel is in every truck that's sitting in the parking lot because getting diesel fuel is very easy and every driver knows how to do it. So there's a lot of challenges before you start seeing significant numbers in operation, but the technology is very much here already.
Robert, Stephanie, want to share any of your thoughts on energy?
Yeah. So I talk about the shortage a lot, and what's interesting about the driver shortage, so trucking is inherently a capital-intensive industry. You have to buy trucks, or you have to get people to lease you trucks, and unlike most capital-intensive industries, the driver shortage has created a market that is incredibly fragmented. So there's about 3.5 million trucks on the road in the U.S., and there's about 1.2 million companies operating those trucks, which is kind of unprecedented for an industry where each one of those vehicles is $100,000 to $200,000. Because of that fragmentation, because of that difficulty of hiring drivers, the number one issue for almost all of those fleets is how do I hire more drivers? How do I retain drivers more effectively? You expect your drivers to churn over every 9 to 18 months. And effectively, how do I put patches in the holes of the bucket, and how do I get more water in? And because of that, the current state of the state is that almost always, almost all large trucking fleets would get better ROI from investing in retention bonuses and hiring programs than they would in most fuel-saving measures, which essentially means they don't end up caring that much about fuel efficiency. They don't end up caring that much about electric trucks. That's not to say they wouldn't rather have the extra money in their pocket, but if they have $100,000 to use to create more margin, almost always they're going to make more profit at the end of the year if they put that money into recruiting. Now that's because of the driver shortage. That's because of the fragmented market. While there are going to be multiple winners in the autonomous truck space, there's not going to be 1.2 million winners. There's going to be, 5, 10, 20 who have 80 to 90% of the overall market. And of those fleets, the next big variable cost, once you decrease the labor cost on a per mile basis, the next big cost is fuel. And all of a sudden you have rather massive demands for electric trucks in a way that doesn't quite exist today. And that's when I think when you start to see real progress, and when you start to see requests for proposals out for 20, 30, 40,000 electric trucks in the next 5 years. That's how the market for that shapes itself out. And there's a lot of precedent for that in the trucking industry. I know that folks at Schneider claim to have had their engineers design the aerodynamic roof of most trucks. Previously, all of Freightliner was an in-house brand for a single trucking company. So there's a lot of room for the trucking operators themselves to push this change on the broader industry, but you're not going to see as much of it until autonomy comes here.
And Kelsey, do the insurance requirements change for insuring a traditional truck with gas or diesel versus an electric?
There's certainly a lot of risks to take into consideration when it comes to electric. The first is that we don't have a lot of the numbers yet, but that when these types of vehicles get into accidents, it can result in a total loss more quickly. So that's my insurance speak. But, realistically, the risks are not that much different because we're actually insuring the driver, right? The equipment, if it is a total loss, the cargo, if it's total loss, that's a number we know. And right now, we're pretty good at predicting human behavior. We're good at predicting that humans are actually really bad drivers. And that's something that we really feel on our bottom line. So changing the risk of the driver and that type of predictability more dramatically will make a bigger impact on insurance than the switch from diesel fuel to electric.
And just to add on to that, because I agree with Stefan, I don't think, especially the long-haul truck will be the last deployment of EVs. But we recently finished a study working with the University of California, San Diego, and their study came out with about a 10% improvement for fuel efficiency or carbon, depending on how you want to look at that, of an autonomous truck compared to a manually driven truck. And 10%, and I keep like, whatever, but in the trucking industry, that is a very big number, especially at economies of scale, small scale right now. But the way the autonomy drives the truck a lot more efficiently and elegantly, you can get some real fuel savings around that just for diesel today.
And there's been a lot of conversations when you look at efficiencies in the trucking industry about the depot strategy, where the truck will pull off the side of the highway, empty the cargo into smaller vehicles, refuel, go. Any thoughts? I'll ask the group, and we'll start with Stefan on that depot strategy that's being discussed.
I think it's a really cute idea that people who don't work in trucking have come up with. To be really subtle about it.
You have no filter.
So, as a trucking operator, we want to get about $800 per truck per day. Way better if we get $1,200, obviously, but that's what we want to be getting. There's an interesting precedent for this. In a lot of Walmart's distribution centers, they use there's people who you pay essentially to unload your truck. And that's typically in the range of $50 to $100 to have them load or unload your truck, and that has to do with who owns the goods in a Walmart warehouse, on a Walmart store, in a Walmart distribution center. So there's a good precedent for people without equipment costing $50 to $100 to load or unload, and it would be and when you haul for Walmart, that's an extra price that's already built in. If those people had to have their own truck that they're going to drive and be insured to drive, even if they're just driving it a couple of miles, all of a sudden that would probably be about $150 to move that trailer for that first and last chunk. Seems fairly reasonable. If $300 gets added to our cost structure on a daily basis, if we're aiming for a load a day at $800 a day, if $300 gets added to our cost basis, we have no market. Like, that is, even with perfect autonomy, no teleop, honestly, even maybe with like electric trucks, there's no market. There's not a business model to support having that extra $300 of cost of moving that. On the autonomy side, those special depots would essentially need to be within the first intersection of the off-ramp. And what I mean by that is the distribution center is already placed within a few miles of the highway off-ramp. They're not trying to be hard for trucks to get to. The whole point is the opposite. So if the autonomous truck then has to come off the off-ramp, navigate an intersection, make an unprotected left-hand turn, you might as well just get to the distribution center. And it's pretty hard to build stuff immediately off the off-ramp. It's pretty expensive to build stuff immediately off the off-ramp.
Yeah, for some reason that real estate's expensive. I don't know why.
Crazy that people want to sell stuff and own that land. So at a high level, I don't think it's a feasible strategy. I think it works really well for a certain set of stakeholders in the space, but it's not practical.
Robert, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100%. It looks great on a PowerPoint and in theory, but just like Stefan, go the extra mile. Not to be a cliche, but yeah, these large distribution centers, and there will be some certain distribution centers that we can't go to, right? But that's okay. You know, if they're in downtown Dallas, we're not going to be driving through the Metroplex, but most of the large distribution centers are outside these dense urban areas along and near the highway, and that's what we can do. So it's, the transfer hub, I mean, as I'm putting my regulatory hat on, you know, I don't know how long the trucking industry's been fighting for truck parking and getting, you know, easements, and it is a scalable nightmare. Like I said, it's great for a demo or a deck, but when you think about economies of scale, it's a headache and a half.
To be clear with that truck parking issue, there currently isn't enough parking spaces for trucks to park at night, which means that if you are a truck driver and you are tired and you feel it is no longer safe for me to drive, you might not be able to stop driving simply because there aren't enough parking lots to do so in. Which is ridiculous, and part of that problem is parking lots are surprisingly expensive. It might seem cheap to you because you rarely get charged to park at a parking lot, but parking lots to build are, you know, in the range of a couple of $1 million per parking lot, which then is added cost to every load in its own unique way.
So I have a bit of a different perspective on this, and partly because I see so many different companies executing on different models. Both of you guys have models basically with the intent of going all the way from the origin all the way to the destination in two different ways. But there may be certain markets where the regulatory environment doesn't allow autonomous vehicles to enter city centers or, you know, these areas where you need to get to. So there's specific smaller segments of, you know, either geographically or otherwise that may require those types of models. But I agree that it's long-term, that is not the right and sustainable strategy, and it does introduce a significant amount of cost. So you'll probably still see it, though.
Kelsey, any thoughts?
Nope.
No. You plead the fifth? It's interesting in the industry now, we're all seeing this pivot to trucking. I'm calling it the great pivot. You're putting it on a PowerPoint presentation, and it's like, oh, trucking's cool. We're no longer going to make vehicles. We're going to make trucks. What are your thoughts on this big pivot, Robert? And what do companies like yours and Starsky, what do they already know that everybody else is now starting to figure out?
Well, now, to be fair, 2 years ago, the regulatory situation was a dark, dark place for autonomous trucks. We were left out of AV 2.0. We were a footnote. We were carved out of self-drive and AV Start, even though those didn't pass. So the big fear is that this never scales. You might have fun driving around Arizona and Florida all day, but you never get it in 48 states. Then US DOT last year, last October, dropped AV 3.0 on us, an intermodal solution and a pathway for all 48 states. And it's no coincidence you saw Daimler, Volvo, probably about 6 new startups launched since then. And now we have these giant companies. I think I saw the CEO of Daimler saying, "Oh yeah, that robotaxi thing was fun, but now we're serious. We're going to focus on trucks." So I feel like we can really pat ourselves on the back, like really, really hard. And it's nice that we've had a few years leg up advantage on the competition. Not that we all can't get caught, but yeah, it is. I mean, it's B2B. You don't have to teach consumers how to deal with autonomous vehicles. You're dealing with a concentrated, highly capitalized buyer network that has built-in infrastructure around this country, distribution centers already in line, highly skilled maintenance facilities. I mean, looking back on a deck 2 years ago, I would have been like, kind of like, of course, trucks would be the first. 99% of the driving is on a divided highway. So and again, you don't have to map 18 cities to make it profitable. You have to map 1 or 2, 3 major freight corridors, and you're ready to go and making lots and lots of money.
And Chris, Ryder sits in a unique position, and what are your thoughts as more and more companies approach you to have conversations on this?
Ultimately, retrofits of existing vehicles probably isn't the right strategy, right? So you're going to see the traditional OEMs incorporating hardware into their vehicles. The hope is that that hardware is going to be open for basically anyone's software to plug into and to be able to control that vehicle, because ultimately we're not really in the business of taking a vehicle and then throwing it through a retrofit center, drilling a bunch of holes and doing that. So there's going to be a point in time when the traditional OEMs are very much working together with companies like these in order to understand the pathway, because everybody's system is going to be slightly different, and there's going to be different customers that want different systems. And the traditional OEMs, they accommodate their customers ultimately.
Stefan, what are your thoughts on retrofitting?
Yeah, so I do agree that in the longer term it won't be a retrofit. What's interesting about this space, and also to echo some of what Robert said, what's interesting about this space is the numbers are just a lot different. So a good there's somewhere between 30 and 100,000 Uber and Lyft cars in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is pretty remarkable compared to an area with about 10 million people in it. And to serve that with robo-taxis, let's say, they're super efficient, they're way better than Uber drivers could ever be. It's the magic of autonomy. Maybe 10 to 20,000 robo-taxis to serve the Bay Area. And that might be a good business and a really long way off, and you'd have to really be able to drive everywhere in that area. By my count, as the operator, about 15,000 trucks makes us in the range of $11 billion a year, probably around a 50% margin. And that probably makes us worth more than all the truck OEMs put together. Somewhere between the 5 autonomous trucks we have today and the 15,000 autonomous trucks, my guess is it's going to be pretty easy to get our stuff built into the pre-existing system. And by my math, and this isn't including Ryder or Penske in it, The largest for-hire fleet right now in the U.S. has about 25,000 trucks, Knight-Swift. They probably buy in the range of 5,000 trucks a year. So well on the way of about 1,000 autonomous trucks, you start to have pretty real leverage with those OEMs in terms of what are you actually going to sell to me? At which point the retrofit problem stops being such a big issue. But you can have a very real business in the hundreds to low thousands of vehicles that is making hundreds of millions to billions of dollars a year and still be doing retrofits.
It's a big pot of gold.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating. And, you know, Kelsey, let's talk a little bit more about A-Verified. What happens when a company moves past this testing stage to deployment and then to generating billions and billions of dollars of revenue? What role does A-Verified play in that growth?
Where we see our opportunity in having this relationship with the companies is that the larger they need to scale and the more parties they need to interact with, the more the question of trust can't just be answered by maybe giving people rides or doing press. You know, we need to come up with a system where we can establish trust very quickly, whether it's the people that you need to haul cargo for or regulators who would like to be updated on operations. We think that this is where really A-Verified can help the industry in its scaling portion, is just creating a method for reliable trust to be built between commercial businesses.
And Robert, you deal with this a lot, but how do we build trust between the industry and elected officials, both on a state level and a federal level?
Yeah, it's not that hard. It's honestly being as transparent and as forthcoming as possible, and it's a relationship business. You know, and whether you're at the federal level, the state level, the local level, you know, Mayor Rothschild, you know, at Tucson, who stuck his neck out for a crazy little company called Too Simple, you know. So it's just going there, you meeting people, telling them the technology, inviting them inside, being a good community partner, working with the local universities, hiring local, supporting locals. You know, it's a relationship business. It's just like any others. Granted, it's, you know, transformative and exciting and all that kind of stuff, but really what it comes down to is it's relationships. Whether you're dealing with, you know, folks in Ryder, my colleagues at Starsky, I mean, I feel like Cam works for him, and we have like our own little lobbying shop. Even though we're direct competitors, we all work together, you know, in public and government affairs. So it really comes down to it. And again, we are, like you mentioned, Grayson, unique because we had a small group, and the kind of the core group of people have kind of set the tone. When new entrants come, they join the group, and we talk about, you know, make sure that we're all operating, not competing on safety, all that kind of stuff, that we're, you know, doing things how they should be done. So the trucking industry, AV space is a little unique compared to our past car friends, but I'm glad where we are.
And you mentioned being a great community partner. I think it's special what you did in Arizona with that college.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that? Because it's really special.
Yeah, so obviously, besides safety, every time I'm in a meeting, whether it's a town hall or with a member of Congress, it's is this safe? And then the next is what's going to happen to my truck drivers in my district. As a kid growing up, I come from a family of truck drivers, and so and there's definitely a nostalgia around it in our country, and it's one of the most numerous jobs that we have in this nation. And Chuck, our Chief Product Officer, always says we want to be a positive disruption. And so even though we're not doing the transfer hub model, we understand even if we drive from Phoenix to Dallas for the Postal Service going to their distribution center to their distribution center, we will still need human drivers to interact with our vehicles for a long time. And so unlike our past car friends who are asking to remove brake pedals and steering wheels and all that kind of stuff from NHTSA, we're not, because we understand these vehicles will need to interact with human drivers, again, for a very, very long time. So we reached out to our local truck driving school, which is Pima Community College, and they developed a certification course, 12 units, so a CDL driver can get a certification to become an autonomous truck driver.
And they just announced that it's their program now. We helped them, we taught them our training manuals, that kind of stuff. So it's not a too simple program. It's a Pima Community College program, so you can go to their website. But they're also going to make that online, which is, I think, really cool. Granted, Pima's our local community college, but it's something that the industry can look at and replicate. I know our friends at Kodiak are looking to bring that program to their new facility out in Dallas. So it's a cool thing for drivers who are interested in technology, want to future-proof for themselves, and come work for tech companies. Our drivers get paid well and get all the advantages of working for a tech company, and like I said, that's not going away in any time in the near future.
It just creates this tremendous opportunity for individuals that might feel like they're being left behind. So I really commend you for it. We talked a lot about transparency, and Stefan, I speak with a lot of law enforcement here in Florida, and the law enforcement that I've interacted with speaks very, very highly of Starsky and when you did your driverless demo, because you reached out to them and you engaged. Can you talk about that? Because they still speak very highly of you.
Yeah, so a great thing about the regulatory framework we have here in Florida is there's ways that it can get you off the road if you're a bad actor, but it's not incredibly prescriptive about what you have to do. And what I like about that is it means if the bar is set, here, it's easier to go well above it, whereas in California, for example, the bar is kind of set up here, and there's a bunch of people who are doing stuff here, and they're never really quite living up to expectations. So before we've done any of our significant tests, we've made sure to, I think one of the big rules in government affairs is don't make the bureaucrats or electeds who matter to you get caught with their pants down. Generally, it's a good policy in life, but essentially, if we do something and someone who's been a partner to us, whether it's at a federal agency, whether it's at a state agency, whether it's an elected, if one of those people is likely to get a call from their boss, it's the person who appointed them, an angry constituent, they need to be able to be smart in that situation and not look like, well, I don't know what those guys Starsky are doing, because no one, frankly, wants to be in that situation. So for our first autonomous road test in early 2017, in January 2017, for our first unmanned closed road test in February of 2018, for our first public unmanned road test in June of this year, for all of those situations, we had a very organized reach-out strategy to folks at the national level, at the state level, some other kind of random stakeholders who we expected would have gotten outreach about it, and both talking them through, hey, here's our plan, here's what we want to do. Afterwards, a quick, as soon as the test is done, we did it, it went well, don't worry. And then a longer follow-up of here's what we did, here's why we decided to do it. For this unmanned test that we did, that included walking them through our safety model, walking them through our test plan, some of the functional safety stuff that we were doing, so that they reasonably knew what we were doing and had the opportunity to point out any errors in judgment that we might be making, because honestly, I'd rather they point them out than me discover that with actions on the ground. I think Florida law enforcement's been in a particularly exciting position to be a leader in this space. There's a number of really interesting open problems with AVs that are a lot more compelling than, gee, how do you pump gas when there's no one in the truck? That includes stuff like how does the highway patrol do a roadside inspection if there's no one in the truck? Most highway patrol officers don't want to climb underneath a truck unless they have the keys in their hands so that the driver doesn't do anything funny. Should you let a person who is dressed up as a law enforcement official climb into an autonomous vehicle because maybe they're not a law enforcement official and maybe they do something bad in that autonomous vehicle? All of those risks are really interesting ones to work through, and we've been incredibly lucky to have the Florida Highway Patrol and others as partners to figure out a lot of that stuff, even at the preliminary state that it's at today.
This is awesome. We've had an incredible, wonderful discussion here, and I like to ask each panelist to, give like a closing remark, and then after that we'll take some audience questions, and I'll start with Kelsey.
I think my only remark is that there's so much opportunity And although many of us can think of many barriers there are to between here and full autonomy, it's certainly things that we can solve together as long as we get all the stakeholders involved, experts in the past, people who have hopes for the future. I don't think that there's anything insurmountable about this challenge. I think it'll deliver a great benefit to our society.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that it's an incredibly positive thing, especially as it comes to safety. The reduction of accidents is a significant savings financially for all of us, right? The goods that you buy in stores are going to be cheaper because there's less waste in the entire system. So I really can't wait for these autonomous systems to start being integrated a lot more and in every segment of trucking, not just, large heavy-duty trucks.
First off, Grayson, thank you very much for having us, and thank you, Miami and Florida. We are not yet in Florida, but we do have plans to get here eventually. So hopefully in the next few years. And thank you, a special thank you to Senator Brandis and his team. They've been great. We've had a good relationship with them for quite some time. And I'd just like to applaud what you guys are doing. You are a leading state in this industry that a lot of folks do hold up. And so kudos to you, and hopefully you'll be hearing good things from Too Simple in the near future.
Yeah, thanks all for letting me talk for an inordinate amount of time on this panel, and thanks Grayson for hosting and inviting me to do so. And kind of broadly piggybacking off of that, what I always love about this event is I think of this as among the most serious autonomy events. There's a number of other great events. There's a number of places where interesting people think and talk. But the difference that I always find when I come to the Florida Autonomous Vehicle Summit is that this is an event of the people who are actually working, and it's less autonomy will happen and more, well, what do we need to do in my district of the the Florida Department of Transportation to enable this, and how do I need to think about my construction plan in the next 10 years? And it's a very different tone shift, and that's part of why I love being here and talking to you all.
Awesome. I will tell you, Florida loves trucking, so thank you all for being here, and the future's bright and the future's autonomous, and happy to open it up to questions if anybody in the audience has any questions. Rob?
There's 15 million trucks entering and exiting our state every year for the last couple of years. Is that in itself enough of a reason to deploy more of this technology because of that number? And it doesn't seem to be going down. And it's an important piece because the number of trucks entering our state is competing with the number of tourists entering and exiting our state. So how do you think about dealing with that? So
I think that's the size and geographic position or geographic setup of Florida makes it particularly interesting. It's I always mix this up. I think third largest by population, and interestingly, because it's a peninsula, there's a lot of interstate trucking where there isn't in some of the square states. In a lot of the square states, traffic is largely going from one square state to another square state, whereas in Florida, there's a lot that is within the state itself, and that's size and shape. What I think is a really interesting opportunity for Florida and autonomous trucks, in general, trucking, a full truckload dry van, which is a full truck, not divided among anyone, not refrigerated, not any of that, is typically costs about $2 per mile to move. A unique problem that Florida faces is South Florida consumes a lot of goods, but doesn't spit a lot back out, which essentially means that if you drive south, you almost always go north empty, or instead of getting $2 a mile to go north, you go north at a buck a mile, which is problematic to say the least. Because of the lack of competition from trucking, this has had an interesting effect on the trains and has then had a not great effect on the economy of South Florida. Trains, for a truckload equivalent, typically charge 60 to 70 cents per mile, whereas the railroads that take freight down from Jacksonville to Miami are able to charge often upwards of $1.40, $1.50 per mile, nearly as much as a truck would get. The big opportunity in Florida isn't just the incredible volume, but it's also the opportunity to fix that to make train prices lower, to put more of that freight mix onto trucks, and to generally lower the cost of living in South Florida.
Awesome. And please join me in giving our wonderful panels a round of applause, and thank you.
Just enough to get off in this club, have me a good time before my time is up. Hey, let's get it now. I want the time of my life. Let's go, man. Oh, baby. Give me the time of my life. Neo, let's get it. Let's get it now. Last $20 I got, but I'ma have a good time balling in that. Set a bartender, line up some sides, cause I'ma get loose tonight. She's on fire, she's so hot, I'm no liar. She burned up the spot, look like Mariah. I took another shot, sold her, drop it like it's hot. Dirty talk, dirty dance. She a freaky girl, and I'm a freaky